So you've obviously the strip in Geneva-on-the-Lake is pretty famous and gets a lot of tourism. And Conneaut has a nice beach, nice parks, but I know a lot. If you ask the average person, you're going to say that there needs to be more in the lakefront in Conneaut. Do you have any, when you go through there, like this would be good here, or what you think should be going on there?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that would be good there. I mean, your public water and your public access to the water is tremendous there. That is a huge advantage, and there should be definitely a big deal made about that. Not all communities have that, and I would say almost no communities have that. In addition to that, you have a deep water port. I mean, those are two huge advantages. I think if you had to draw a vision, I think there is a tourism economy to maximize there. I've been fishing. I do like to fish, and I've been fishing out of the Conneaut port many, many times. And one of the things that always strikes me down there is there's no way to go from the docks and being waterside to walk up the hill and patronize a business. And I think that's a challenge. You also have some tremendous park systems. Some, are, to my understanding, are owned by the city, and then there is also a township park board. So you kind of have a duplicating process of parks, and then you have the Conneaut Port Authority controlling the port itself and the launch ramps and so on and so forth. One is getting those groups together and talking about what amenities are going to be provided by whom and how we're going to make these amenities mesh with one another. Because as much as maybe we know locally that they're different entities and different groups, if you drive from out of town, you don't know, and probably nor do you care. But you do know good design versus bad design, good amenities versus poor amenities. Are there public restrooms, clean public restrooms? Are there sidewalks for me to get from here to there? People, when they're on vacation, just like any of us when we go on vacation, we would love to go park the car and never go back to that thing again, because right. I can't imagine anybody that enjoys driving while on vacation. So, building up those amenities. Do we have bicycle racks? Do we have other things so people can walk and bike and be outdoors? Because let's face it, if they come to the lake, they're not coming up there to be indoors. So are we addressing those amenity needs? Do we know what they are? Have we asked them? When we did our comprehensive plan for the village of Geneva-on-the-Lake, we put a big emphasis on not only asking our local residents what they need and what they would like to see, asking our businesses what they think their needs are, and also asking our tourists what they want to see up here. What do you guys want to see? What businesses do you want to go to? What kind of public amenities do you need? And ultimately, we asked 6,000 tourists, and we got 1,000 responses, and it was a survey that took approximately 10 minutes to complete. So we thought that was a tremendous response. And it becomes a great economic development tool because, one, we can now plan that infrastructure and meet those infrastructure needs, sidewalks, bike racks, restrooms, whatever those need to be, and maybe look at some different amenities that we weren't thinking of that came as a suggestion. And then ultimately you can take that same information and share it with your business community and say, you may be doing this already, or we may not be doing this already, and it might be a business opportunity to locate a new business there. And you say, look, we've asked 1,000 people. Out of 1,000 people, 900 said they would come to a business that does this. That's an easy thing to sit down with an entrepreneur and say, there is a demand in our market. There are, 500,000 people or whatever that come through this port every year. If you catch 1 out of 20, and here we're saying, 1 out of every 5 is saying that they want to see this. So, you can kind of add, a business attraction component and saying, this is the demand of our customers. Are we listening?
So you were talking a little bit about the downtown. What do you think needs to be? Well, I guess an example that kind of pulled together some things you said is about the same time last spring, we find out that the Gateway Plaza is in horrendous shape. The Kmart building there is in terrible shape with the roof and stuff, and everybody wants to. At the same time, there's a little boutique in downtown Conneaut that the roof has collapsed and ruined everything. And because I did a video on it, the same day I had something about Kmart was the bunkhouse. So it's all of a sudden it's like something needs to be done here so that you don't have all of these things happen like within the same 3 days or 2 days.
Well, in my experience, they always come in groups, so they never come one at a time. But when we look at these things, and I think there's some really great examples to follow. You look at Geneva's downtown. You look at even the Bridge Street area in Ashtabula. What people don't see is they see such positive things happening there, but they fail to see all the work that has gone into it before that. And they're using a specific section of grants in the Community Development Block Grant Series. And one, it involves a plan and it's kind of a survey of your assets. And then 3, there's a grant component. The 4th component, I would say, is a code enforcement component that you need to continue to push people to maintain their properties, the sidewalks, continuing to paint their buildings. I mean, all these things wear and tear, and they need to be refreshed. But I think all too often you can say, well, we need to go to do more code enforcement. I'm a firm believer you need equal parts carrot and stick. You can do your code enforcement, and it needs to be done, and it needs to be done consistently. But you also need to be able to offer the opportunity on the other side that, it will meet you halfway if you're willing to reinvest. I think what people don't see and where you get a scared investor environment is, why do I take the money out of my wallet to invest in this community when I don't know where this community is going, what they want to do? Do they even want a vibrant downtown? I don't know what their plans on. What is it going to look like? That's not a sure investor environment. So by going through a planning process, coming up with that plan and saying, this is what we will do, then I think people say, okay, I can understand that. And then I think we also need to focus on the people themselves. I mean, downtowns are really just a group of buildings, but making sure that there's a strong understanding in that kind of little downtown association group of buildings of why it's important, why the downtown's there. And the mission of the downtown versus the harbor district are going to be different. Doesn't mean they can't be related, but they're going to be different. And we need to make sure that we're meeting those needs and have equal components of plan to serve each. Mm-hmm. So they're similar but they're not the same. They may rhyme, but they're going to be different.
What about zoning in Conneaut? Have you looked at that at all? There's been discussions for there's people that say Route 20 through Conneaut, there's a lot of residential areas that you can't put a building in, and then other people will say, and that's bad. Then other people will say, well, we have homes here and we don't want another Family Dollar next to our home or whatever.
Sure. And as far as the zoning map, I don't have it in front of me and I haven't committed it to memory, nor can I say that of your code. But zoning, and I'm the zoning officer for Geneva-on-the-Lake. That's part of the reason I asked. It's one of my multiple hats. I have a big hat rack in the back. One of the jokes in zoning is zoning isn't there to control what you do; it's to control what your neighbor does. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that we're not losing the purpose of zoning. The purpose of zoning is to make sure that we're getting the highest and best land use and to ensure property valuation. So I think when we talk about any of these, we need to talk about what's an appropriate area for certain types of businesses and certain types of business activities, and then where is it important to preserve that residential character, and there's a balance to be struck there. The other part that you don't hear as much, at least in this neck of the woods of Ashtabula County, is talk about the zoning code itself. If it's like Geneva-on-the-Lake, it's dated, it's antiquated, it's usually an outgrowth of that 70s and 80s pod style zoning where, here be, residential, and then all the way over here is the commercial, and then this is a different district, and this is a different district, and we've abandoned even those very fundamental things, and one of the reasons a lot of our downtowns look so broken is, nice high 2-story multi-story building, one that got knocked down with a building set to the rear of the lot. It looks goofy. It makes people feel goofy. There are a lot of design characteristics that are tone deaf to that pod style zoning. So you see a lot of communities actually reverting back to a mixed use style zoning where you can have a retail activity on that first floor space and a residential activity on the upper floors of that space. That's what you see in Geneva. That's what you see in downtown Ashtabula. Are we doing that in downtown Conneaut? Is that allowable, or is it only allowable as a continuing legal non-conforming use? Because if it's not, then maybe that's something we need to address, and maybe we need to refresh some of those codes and how our codes actually design stuff. Form-based zoning, which is kind of a really technical way and technical pattern of thought, saying not to let the triumph of technique go over purpose. That our goal is to situate a business with reasonable understanding of its relationship to the surrounding community. Can we generally meet these? Could we trade maybe a stormwater offset for a parking commitment, or parking for stormwater? Can we trade certain things and come up with a plan that works for that specific property? The rub with planning in general is that we're trying to create a set of rules that serve everyone, and sometimes they end up serving no one. So at that point, maybe we need to pull out and start tackling that. Now, these aren't things that happen in big, grandiose studies and we sit there and rewrite the whole zoning code in a week or something like that. It doesn't happen that way. It happens over time, and we deal with these little issues and we continually make it better. So you have to, as they say, when you're eating elephant, you do it one bite at a time. So, that's really the issue with all of these. If you're talking about large infrastructure challenges, street resurfacing, so on and so forth, is you come up with a plan and you do it little pieces at a time. And you do it slowly, you do it methodically, and you do it collaboratively with your community and council.
So there's a little bit of a running theme in your discussions is that it's like, don't expect huge changes the next week after Jim Hockaday takes over.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll see some changes in 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And one of the reasons that you were kind of touted is that you have been living in Ashtabula County. So your predecessor, he kind of left Conneaut for the same reasons you're coming here. He had family elsewhere and wanted to be near them. So in 4 or 5 years, do you think you'd be still interested in being in Conneaut, or?
Absolutely.
Because that's one thing I heard from the council president, Nick Church, was that he's hoping that somebody that's going to stay around more than 3 or 4 years and they're not going through the whole process again.
I made that commitment to Geneva-on-the-Lake. I told them I would stay at a minimum 5 years, and I've met that commitment, and I think they've gotten a lot of good work out of me. We've gotten several millions of dollars in grants. We've gotten a lot more done. To say that, because we take our time and are methodical about things, but doesn't mean we're not accomplishing a lot. I think if you looked at Geneva-on-the-Lake today versus where it was 5 years ago, I think you would see some tremendous differences. Not only just in terms of physical infrastructure, but in terms of our personnel, the quality of our personnel, the quality of the services that we're delivering. The big thing to remember is that we don't have a lot of resources. Whether we're talking about Geneva-on-the-Lake or whether we're talking about Conneaut or probably any community in Ashtabula County, is we don't have a lot of resources. To say that we're going to make a wild zag left or a wild zag right and try something completely new and different is probably misappropriated, because you only have this many resources. If you try something and it doesn't work, then you've wasted all your resources on something that doesn't deliver. So we spend a lot of time and we start small and we make those component changes that we need to, and when we meet success, we continue to do more of it. So that's a standardized philosophy that I think everybody should have. Most successful businesses have that philosophy, and I think successful governments have that philosophy as well. As far as whether or not I would stay 5 years or 100, there's a couple. There's a lot into that. One, all your city managers, I promise you, are people.
Yes.
that they have families and lives, and circumstances are always prone to change, just as they are in your own lives. It is a human enterprise, and just as all the people that work for a city or in government, counselors, all the way down to, police officers and street department personnel, they're all humans, and we're all prone to changes in our lives. So that's a big thing. I would share with anyone that I lost my father last year. That was a very watershed moment for me and my family. It was very unexpected, and it's changed my perspective on how I look at things. My emphasis on staying close to family is stronger now than it was a year ago. My life has changed in a major way. To that end, I'm committed to staying in Conneaut, and staying there for a long period of time. What people don't understand about municipal government is our cycles happen in years. So, when you look at this, it probably takes you about a year to learn an entire new system. And anybody that comes there, even if they come from within, they're going to be sitting in a different chair and are going to have to spend a year trying to wrap their brain around that different perspective. Doug Starkey's been in
just think of Doug Starkey.
He's been in Geneva for his entire career for the most part, and now he's sitting in a different chair, and it's a whole new perspective for him. So he's almost going to have to relearn the community he knows and deal with even his own department and the fire department probably differently now as a city manager than he did as a fire chief. So you're going to have that learning process with anyone. Whether they're a seasoned veteran or whether they're a little younger, it matters not. But to get good at it and to build to larger projects, you don't just go out and do a $7.5 million wastewater treatment plant. You build towards it, and it takes a long time to get there. So to say that you can come in and in 2 years or 3 years effectuate a lot of change is probably not true. You need, I would say, at a minimum 5 years and preferably longer to really start to change the face of that community and push it in one direction or another, because our budgets happen in year-long cycles. So our activities are planned out by the year. So if that's your basic unit of understanding as a year, then we make that slow and determined progress, year after year. And it takes consistency to do that. So that's kind of what I would say. So you have to have a manager that's committed to staying and committed to being there. And you also have to have a community that's willing to go through the growing pains to keep them there. So, it's a two-way street. And I think everybody needs to understand these things as kind of a two-way relationship. You have your community and your council and your manager, and they equally rely on each other. In Saybrook, and my wife and I purchased a house last year. Our plan is, and it's a charter requirement, that I establish residency within a year, and that's our goal, is to establish residency within a year.
Okay, so you're looking forward to it all?
I've had plenty of house offers, by the way. So,
have you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So,
do you want to describe a little bit?
I think everybody's got something for sale, so they know a good deal when they see it. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's going to be a change, definitely from Geneva-on-the-Lake to Conneaut.
Absolutely.
And so is it part of all this just a different set of challenges?
It's definitely going to be a different set of challenges. I think there's going to be a little more diversity in the challenges. Certainly, there are a little more diverse set of needs. We rely exclusively on a tourism economy. Obviously, there's an industrial base there, as well as a much larger community, a residential population community, and you have a lot more diversity than most communities have, in the sense that a good portion of the community is, in fact, not even an urban community. It's a rural population with different wants, demands, and needs. And so I think that's one of the challenges to governing in one of those situations, is that you have a very diverse population set, and their needs between the extreme rural areas versus the urban areas, downtown, Creekside, Harbor area, are all very different. And you have to not be tone deaf to those differences. And it's a growth opportunity, in the sense that it's a larger physical staff, but it also has a few more diverse departments. Obviously, we have a mayor's court here. We do not have a municipal court, so there's some differences there. And you have that in every community. Some communities have different services and different natural amenities, and you have to adapt no matter where you go.
You also have a mayor here, and you have a council.
Oh, you're on my personal hobby horse, which is forms of government.
So there's no mayor in Conneaut anymore. Although every time a city manager leaves, somebody says we ought to go back to a mayor because they were just. All you have to do was be from the community.
You're trying to get me in trouble on this one. And the reason I say that is, forms of government were specifically my focus and field of study, local government and academia. And their mayoral systems versus manager systems are very different, and they're different by design. And the easiest way I can explain this is mayoral systems are the American system of government, the presidential model, which is a separation of powers, checks and balance model, written very smallly on local government. So you have a mayor that has their own powers and a legislature that's got their own power, and you still actually have a judiciary. Council manager systems are actually unitary forms of government, which we see are the parliamentary style governments in Europe, where you have a body of elected officials that then select a chief executive officer that works essentially by appointment of that legislative body, to diametrically opposed forms of government. There's been a lot of study in terms of, what are the effects of those different forms of government. And there are a few. I would say a lot of them are kind of very common sense. One, you tend to see different decisions being made in council manager formats government, because the manager is trying, or should be trying, to make the long-term best decisions for the community. They are not always popular. A lot of them will not be vote getters, but they don't have to be. They just have to be the best decision for the community, and that's the ethos of the council manager format of government. In a mayoral form of government, you have to be responsive to the voters. And governments are big animals. You're looking at the city of Conneaut, and it's got about 13,000 residents and about a $13 million budget. If you were going to select a person to manage a business with a $13 million revenue stream and a couple $100 million in physical assets, do you do that by saying who's most popular, or do you say on which basis of merits and who is the best suit and fit for the position? I don't see many businesses going to their employees and voting on who's going to be CEO, and I think there's a reason for that. So I'm a firm believer in a council manager form of government. You do see at the higher ends of larger communities, they tend to trend towards mayoral style governments. And I think there's a good reason for that as well. One, people like the accountability factor. Let's vote the bum out. People like that. It makes sense. It's a digestible form of government. But they're also big enough in terms of their budgets and mass and so on and so forth. What you see under most of those management systems is a chief administrative officer
who's like a manager,
who's a city manager that works in the direct employ of a mayor. Now, you made reference to our mayor. It's a completely different system yet. We are a statutory village in Geneva-on-the-Lake. And what that means is we have a mayor, but it's actually not quite the same. Our mayor has no vote in the legislative body. He has limited appointment powers. He does not have veto powers. He does not have, line item authority over items. So it's actually what we would call a weak mayor system. And that's in the Ohio Revised Code. We could charter out and say we were going to write our own charter with our own form of government, but that's something that would have to be popularly, chosen to do, and somebody would have to take the time to sit down and write a charter.
There is a community in Ashtabula County, a city that does have a mayoral form of government.
Yes, Ashtabula City.
Right.
And
We'll just call him
incorrectly-
city manager to kind of muddy the waters.
I don't want to start any fights here. So yes, Jim Timonier is in fact a mayor. They call them the city manager. But for true typology, they are a mayoral system of government. So, they just operate differently. And it's different needs for different communities. I mean, Ashtabula City is almost twice the size of Conneaut as well. And Jim has a larger staff underneath him than Conneaut does. We can also know from analysis that of those mid-range size communities like Conneaut, that the council manager systems of government tend to be, one, more efficient. They tend to be higher service. They tend to have lower debt levels. They tend to have a more what you would call progressive stance, in the sense that they try and do more as a government rather than trying to do less as a government. Not necessarily Republican or Democrat.
Right.
They tend to be apolitical in nature. But you see broader ranges of service in council manager formats of government, and they tend to have higher budgets in general. And I think you can almost directly attribute that to a more stable form of government that is an apolitical form of government.